Hi, I'm Melanie, and you're about to watch a message that was preached here at Calvary Fellowship in Miramar, Florida. At Calvary, we exist to help you take your next step in your relationship with God, and we pray that this message helps you do just that.
All right, how's everybody doing? It is great to see you. It is great to be with you. I know Video Bob's been with you. He sends his regards, by the way. But it is great to be with you in person here at 1 o'clock, my favorite service. So the other day, my wife hears a noise above the kitchen cabinets. And she says, I think there's a rat above the kitchen cabinets. Can you take a look? So I get the ladder from the garage. I look up there. I don't see anything. And I don't see anything that rats kind of leave behind. I don't see anything. So I'm like, listen, there's nothing there. She's like, well, then there must be rats in the attic. Can you look in the attic? I don't know about how your attic is, but my attic is like 8,000 degrees. And I'm like, listen, can we please just, all right. So I go up there, I climb up into the attic, look around, nothing. So I kind of forget about the whole thing and move on with my life. I get home the following day, and I pull in, and I see a palm that has fallen on the side of my house. And I think that's what it was. A palm hit the side of my house, and then as it was falling, the little leaves, palm, the front, anyway, they just kind of made a sound that sounded like scratching or whatever. So I tell my wife, I'm like, that's probably what it was. She's like, no, it definitely wasn't that. I'm like, well, there's nothing there. What do you want me to do? That's it. So anyway, that afternoon, my two youngest go in the pool, and then my daughter Mia and my wife and I were kind of having a late lunch, and my wife is standing at the sink washing her hands, and my daughter Mia, who's 11, she says, Dad, what's that? And I look, and I say, oh, Carrie, you were right. There is a critter up there. And it was this giant lizard or small iguana. I don't know where one ends and the other begins, but the thing was like that big, including the tail. And my wife looks up, and they lock eyes. And she's like, no, Bob, you get the Windex, get the Windex. And I'm like, I don't know what you think Windex is going to do, unless you just want this iguana to not have any streaks when we clean it. But it's not going to do anything. If you want me to take care of this, and then Mia starts freaking out, and I'm like, I need you guys to step back and let me work. So they go to the other side of the house, and I get the broom out of the pantry. Now, if you've heard any of my other stories, you know the broom is my weapon of choice when dealing with these animals. So, nonetheless, so it's still standing there, like right on the edge of the top of the cabinets. So I come up with the stealth of a ninja. I'm just stating that. Just so stealthy. With the stealth you would come to expect from someone like me. So stealthily, I come over, and just like I learned watching Karate Kid, sweep the leg. Boom, hit him. Sweep him, he hits the counter. Sweep him again, he hits the floor. Tries to run. Bam, I got him. Now, how am I going to get him out of the house? That's my other problem. So, I lay the broom on top of him, and he can't move. My inspiration for this was, and if you watch any of the Thor movies, where he'll just take Mjolnir and just lay it on someone and they can't move because it's so heavy. That's my inspiration. People say that we look alike. Anyway, and so, hey, you laughed a little too hard at that. You really hurt me. You really hurt me right there. Anyway, so I go, and on the side of our house, off of our kitchen, we have a door that leads outside. So I open the door. Then I come back to the situation. I come back to the broom with the lizard iguana thing. So I pick it up, and then it starts to run. But with skills that I can only really attribute to growing up in Boston and watching the Bruins my whole life, and playing hockey in the pond when it would freeze over in my backyard, or a little path in my backyard. I pick up the broom, and with this, in a one-timer wrist shot, boom, and it just goes straight out. I mean, it's probably like a 15-foot, reach, goes straight out the door. If you guys were there, you would have clapped. You would have. It was that, thank you. It was that impressive. Every other service clapped. I'm just saying, but every other service did. So, all right, that's your one reminder to keep up. All right? So, anyway, so the wrist shot, it goes straight out. I'm the hero of my house. But here, we got to deal with another issue, and that is, how did this thing get into my house? Which that I already knew. My two youngest kids, Xander, who's 8, he'll be 9 next month. Livy, who is 6, they have this terrible habit of opening the door, walking outside, and leaving it open for all of creation to come in if it so chooses. And then, of course, we also have the pleasure of air conditioning the outside. And so the first thing that I do, now I got to tell you something that I do. I'm not saying it's right. And if you've heard me tell some stories, you know that I do this. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's what I do. So I live at the end of my community. And so there's this big retaining wall on the outside of my community. As I've told you in the past, Donald Trump would love my house. There's a big wall. And so what I do, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's what I do. If there is anything in my yard that I don't want to deal with, I just throw it over the wall. Because on the other side of the wall is the homeowners association that I pay for, and they deal with all of it. So if it's a tree, a palm, a tire, who knows, and lots of things. But I'll just, and then sometimes there's like weird animals, and they just, with my shovel, I just throw them over the wall. So anyway, but I haven't thrown this lizard over the wall because I have to teach my kids, like, what happened. So anyway, I told Xander to get out of the pool. Xander, come here. And I'm like, you see this lizard iguana thing? Yeah. Dad, that's humongous. I'm like, I know. It was in our house. Your mom almost had a heart attack. And I said, do you know why it got in the house? Do you know why it got in the house? How? And he says, no. And I said, it's because you guys keep leaving the door open. That's why this lizard had to die. It's because, I know I probably laid it on a little thick, but I'm trying to get the point across, and I'm like, so you gotta close. Yeah, you're right, Dad. I'm sorry, but can I ask a question? Sure. Why haven't you thrown it over the wall? I'm getting to that. All right, so he goes in. Livy, come here. Livy comes over, and Livy's like, Dad, is that a lizard? Is that an iguana? I'm like, I don't know what it is, but do you know where it was? No, it was in our house, 3 feet from your mom's head. And the lizard died. And we're getting rid of him. But you can't leave the door open. That's how we got in the house. Okay, Dad, but can I ask you a question? Yes. Why haven't you thrown it over the wall yet? And so anyway, then I grabbed the shovel, threw it over the wall because I want to be a good dad, and I don't want to leave my kids hanging. And I don't know. Listen, it's so weird, but I think everybody has a weird story like that. It's like it's a weird story like that, or something. You get a flat tire, a car breaks down, something. You're like, why? You ever notice like your car never breaks down when you got nothing to do? It's always when you're on your way, you're on a tight schedule to do something, and then these things happen, and you're like, I don't have time for these interruptions. And I'm learning this. Maybe you already know this, but I'm learning this, is that these interruptions are not obstacles to our life. These things that we deem as obstacles are the blocks that are building our lives. And that's really at the heart of what God wants to teach us today through King Solomon, through the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, if you haven't been with us, Ecclesiastes, the series is called The Meaning of Everything. We're going through this book called Ecclesiastes, which is part of the Old Testament, which is called, the section is called the Wisdom Literature. It's 5 books. It's Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. It's made up, it's called the Wisdom Literature. The word Ecclesiastes is a Latin term to translate a Hebrew word, koheleth, and it means the preacher or the teacher. But that's essentially what it is. Solomon, King Solomon, is the preacher. He's the one who's teaching us and showing us. He's taking us on this journey from him saying that everything is meaningless, all of life is meaningless, and he's taking us on a journey to what gives life meaning. And today he's talking to us about time. He's talking to us about our relationship to time, our need for time, and how we leverage time so that we don't find ourselves wasting it and thus wasting our lives. In the book of Psalm, in the 90th Psalm, there's this passage that says this. He says, so teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. I want you to think about the truth of that verse for a moment. That wisdom, right, that understanding and appreciating the time that we have is one of the keys to living your life with wisdom. And so that's at the heart of what Solomon is going to talk about today in our text. So if you have your Bible, I'd love for you to open with me to Ecclesiastes 3. If you open the Calvary app that you downloaded earlier, you can get to Ecclesiastes 3, or we have the notes that we gave you, and that has all the verses that we're going to cover. We're going to start in verse 1, and here's what we read. It is, to everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. And if you pause there and give me your attention, Solomon he's going through all of these different things in life. And so if you're saying, well, what are we going to do with time, this time in relationship to our lives? And so if you're a note taker, here's the first thing that we have to do, is that we need to understand the rhythms of life. Understand the rhythms of life. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Boston. One of the cool things about growing up in Boston is you really get you get to fully embrace all the seasons. So, and the cool thing about the seasons, you fully embrace them because the seasons aren't going to last forever. So you might be going through a really cold winter, but the thing that gets you through the winter is knowing that it's not going to last forever. There's going to be a spring that's going to be really awesome, and everything's going to be in bloom. The weather's going to get better. It's going to warm up, and you're embracing that because you know summer's coming, and summer's going to come. It's going to get very, very hot, but it's only about 6 weeks that it's really, really warm. And then fall is going to come. It's going to cool down. It's the best time of year in Boston is the fall. The leaves are changing. There's a great breeze. It's a really wonderful time, and you're enjoying that because you know that winter is happening again. And now the challenge that we have is that we don't experience that. We have basically variations of one season. In South Florida, we basically operate in 3. Hot, hotter, surface of the sun. That's pretty much what we deal in. Those are our seasons. And the tendency that we have, because of the climate that we have, we don't deal in a lot of seasons, we tend to think of this list as something that we pick and choose from. And because there's stuff on this list that I don't like. I'm guessing you don't either. Like, I'm more into living than dying. I'm more into planting and not plucking up what's been planted. As far as killing and healing, it kind of depends on who I'm dealing with, so I probably want a little bit of both of those. But I want to build up and not tear down. Laughing or crying, I want to laugh until I cry. I'd rather dance than mourn. I'd rather gather stones and build than tear down. If you're married, I prefer embracing to refraining from embracing. But this is not a list that we choose from. This is a list of seasons that we all experience. And the challenge that we have is, if this is a list of seasons that we all experience, then why does God allow not the 14 good ones to happen, but what about the bad ones? Why do we have to have, why can't we just avoid the ones that we don't like? And God just give us the ones that we do. And so let me kind of explain it this way. How many of you, just show of hands, I'm not saying you, but you know someone that is a person who has gotten everything that they've ever wanted in life. They just have had it all handed to them. Anybody, you know somebody like that? A few of you, some of you need to meet more people. But here's what you have. Someone who only gets everything they've ever wanted. These tend to be spoiled, arrogant, self-centered people who care only for themselves. Other than that, they're delightful. But what happens is this, is that it's why as much as you love your kids, you don't give them everything they want. Because it's not how we define good parenting. That good parenting is teaching your kids to be wise. It's teaching your kids to walk with God. It's preparing them for life. And this is the good work that God is doing. This is why every season doesn't stay forever. It's why, I mean, when I remember when my wife and I went on our first date, we went to a movie, and I held my wife's hand, and I don't know what, it was the weirdest thing. I mean, like, all of the moisture in my mouth, like, evaporated, and it all started coming out of the palms of my hands. And so I'm using my pants as a paper towel, and you know, because I'm trying to not have her notice that my hands are sweating because I'm so nervous as as we're spending some time together, and I don't want her to think I'm having some kind of weird episode, like, what is this guy? It's like, all he does is sweat. And so, why? But, you know, that feeling eventually goes away. Same thing, like when the first time her and I went out to dinner, I was so nervous. I had like butterflies, and could you imagine? We've been married for 21 years. That I come home from church, and she's like, so how did it go? And I'm like, well, it's good, but I'm so nervous I can't eat. And why? She's like, what, are you okay? And what, because why? The season changes. And it's not that you don't feel the same way. No, hopefully the season changes and the love matures. And it gets way better than it was, right? If you have young kids, like having babies, like it's so great. But you don't want them to stay babies forever. And so if you're a parent of a newborn, right? And I talk to parents all the time, and they're like, Pastor Bob, it's tough. And I'm like, hey, listen, I've been where you are 3 times. And thank God not a 4th. And but, it gets better. And I just keep telling parents that it gets better, and that there will be this glorious day where your kids will learn to eat by themselves. And there'll be this other glorious day where your kids will learn to use the bathroom without your help. And it is a great thing. And the cool, listen, I had this happen this week, where I dropped off my daughter at youth for the very first time. And so my daughter just finished 5th grade, so she's eligible to go to youth. And so I brought her on Friday night. And she was great. I'm like, are you nervous? And she's like, no. I'm like, why am I nervous then? And it was the weirdest thing for me, because I'm here, I'm dropping her off, and then and I want to hang out, so I'm like saying hello to people and whatever, and then they're like, hey, we don't like the parents to stay with the as the kids are going in, so we're gonna need you to go. I'm like, yeah, but I'm your boss, so that's okay. And I didn't say that. I thought it a lot, but I didn't say that. And but what I did, and I remember, and I'm telling you, now here's the thing. I've had parents tell me before, they're like, we dropped our kids off, and it was such a traumatic experience. I'm like, what's the big deal? And I had to do it, and I had to eat all the words that I've spoken in the past. Like, I told them it's not a big deal, it's a big deal. And it was so hard because the season was changing, right? And here's the weird part is that. Like my wife and I started this church almost 18 years ago. I built this building. I mean, not personally, but I was here every day as it was being built. And I had this amazing privilege of laying the cornerstone. That I actually did. I laid the cornerstone myself. The people who were building had to fix it after because it was like so messed up. And I'm like, how'd I do? And they're like, well, if the earth would tilt a little bit more, it'd be perfect. But yeah, it's a little messed up. And here's the thing. So even with that, I was so nervous because I knew something was happening. I knew the moment that I walked out the door that a season had ended and a new season had begun. And here's the thing that happens is that, and I've told you in the past, I have this little app on my phone called Time Hop that tells me, it'll show me any picture that I took on a given day or anything I posted on social media on that given day going back 9 or 10 years. And so 2 days ago, so this is actually on Friday, maybe this is why I was like, it was such a big deal for me, is that it sent me this picture of, hey, this was 8 years ago today. And it was a picture of Xander and Livy, and Xander and Mia was 3. and Xander was about a little over a year old. And I'm looking at that, and I was like moved emotionally looking at the picture, that I'm like, man, I can't believe, they're so big now. I just can't believe how small they were. And listen, but I don't cry because I missed the opportunity. What I remember the season and that it was so good. And so the goal is this: just don't miss the season that you're in, because they don't last forever. And that's why I'm trying to do my very best. And this season that I'm walking in with my kids is amazing, because it's not the baby season or the toddler season. It's a season where now we're starting to have meaningful conversations about life and about how the world works and about the future. But that, you see, Daniel would say this about God. He says this in Daniel chapter 2, that he, God, changes the times and the seasons, that he removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. And what God is reminding us in these verses, that there is a rhythm to this, and that there's a rhythm to how life works, and that the seasons don't last forever. Even the challenging season that you might be in right now, it doesn't last forever. So what's the point of the tough season then? Well, that's what Solomon is going to say next. Look what he says in verse 9. He says, "What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time, and also he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end." Pause there, please, and give me your attention. What do we do with time? We understand the rhythms of life, but the second thing is this, is that no matter the season, I need to embrace God's eternal work. God's eternal work. That a lot of times there is a work that God is doing under the surface and beyond what anyone can see, that is causing us to move from one season to the next. So I've been on this journey of getting healthy for about the last 8.5 months or so, and I've lost almost 70 pounds. Thank you. I appreciate that. The weird part for me is that the weight hasn't been really what I focused on. I've been focused on other numbers, like blood sugar and cholesterol and waist size. That's so I've lost like 11 inches off my waist. The part that's weird. Thank you, whoever clapped over there. But I'll tell you the weird part. This is the thing I didn't expect. I actually went down a shoe size, which that was kind of not something I did not expect. Like, it's not like you lose weight and you're like, if I could really get these toes under control, I'd really feel healthy, right? So that was kind of a weird thing. But I do like shoes, and so I bought a couple new pairs of sneakers. And my wife was like, I got the box in the mail, and my wife is like, "For real?" And I'm like, "Honey, they don't fit." It's like I'm wearing flippers, I gotta make it work. So anyway, but here's the thing that happens is that if you've ever tried losing weight or getting healthy or anything like that, I mean, it's a challenge, but people don't notice at first. And I always say the worst day of any eating plan or diet or anything is always the second day, because you have all the motivation and none of the results yet. And but here's the thing: is that what's funny is that people, and it happens every week, people say like, "Pastor Bob, are you losing weight?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "How much weight have you lost?" And I'll tell them whatever it is. And then they'll say, well, how long? And I'll say, it's been about 8 months, 8.5 months. And they're like, "Really?" And now I want to like interpret that really for you, because it's not like really. It's not that. It's a really. It's got a little tail to it that crescendos. So. And so you get, this is the part that's important. Now, because they think back, what they're really saying is, "Yeah, but I remember 8.5 months ago and you were really fat." And what happens is that what they're saying is you said you started eight months ago, but I didn't see any of the results 8 months ago. And this is because there was a work taking place that no one could see. And unless I did the work no one could see, I would never get to the place where everyone could see the work that's been done. This is why people give up on things. Because if you can't post it on social media within a week, then, what's the point? But I want to tell you something, that God, even if we don't want him to, God is playing the long game in our lives. And sometimes we just don't see the work he's doing until a season comes to an end. And it's only when he does the work in us that the season actually comes to an end, and then we look back and see, I see what God was doing. Now, Solomon reveals that there's this twofold work of what God is doing in every season of our lives. And he shares them in verse 11, where he says, and here's the first one, and if you're a note taker, he says that he brings beauty out of ashes. What I mean by that is what Solomon says at the beginning of verse 11, that he has made everything beautiful in its time. It doesn't mean that everything is beautiful. It means that in time, there is a purpose, and the purpose is what brings beauty, even if it's a difficult thing. Now, the way I liken it to is there's a lesson I've taught my kids is with chocolate chip cookies. Because chocolate chip cookies essentially consist of 6 ingredients. There's butter, sugar, eggs, flour, baking soda, and chocolate chips. You can be fancier, but essentially 6, ingredients. And so what my kids will do is, when I tell them that we're going to make chocolate chip cookies, is they will say, "Oh, can I try?" And all that I've got out is, butter and sugar and eggs and flour and baking soda and chocolate chips. And what they want to do is try each of the ingredients individually. So as a loving father, I'm like, knock yourself out. And so my son will take like a big spoonful of baking soda. I'm like, disgusting! That's not how chocolate chip cookies taste. No, but you didn't eat chocolate chip cookies. You ate baking soda. That's gross. Why didn't you tell me? Because some things are best learned experientially. And what will happen is that all of these things together, separately, are terrible. But if you will give it time, everything becomes beautiful. And everything becomes tasty, because that's the thing that, listen, God is doing as well. There's a season of your life that might be very bitter, but coupled with something sweet, that the bitter is the only way we can get to it. Now it rounds out the flavor, and you're a different person because of it. And this is exactly what takes place, that God is making everything beautiful in its time, not in isolation, but over the course of time as seasons continue to roll through our lives. That's why the Bible tells us, one of the more famous passages in the Bible, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and those who are the called according to his purpose. The promise that we have there is that nothing in our lives is meaningless, that that God is using everything for his greater purpose in our lives. The second thing that happens in every season is that he places eternity within us. And that's what happens in verse 11. The second half, he says he's made everything beautiful in its time, and he has also put eternity in their hearts. You see, this is the truth. This truth is why every philosophy exists. You see, humanity is different than every other creature on this planet, because we don't just think about our existence, but we think about the meaning of our existence. My mom used to have this dog. I hated that little dog. And the feeling was mutual, because the dog hated everyone, including its owner. And it was a dog with a really bad attitude. My mom would put dog food in the dog bowl, and that dog never once, when I watched it, would stop right before it ate. Thank you, Jesus, for this Alpo that I'm about to eat. I really appreciate that. No, none of that. Never stopped. Why? Because God, unlike other animals, God in us, in human beings, has placed eternity in our hearts. That's why humans think about the meaning of life, because we've been gifted with the gift of eternity. Now, next week, we're going to unpack that to an even greater degree. But this is why everyone is a philosopher. Everyone has a view of how the world works. That doesn't mean everyone's view is correct. However, but it does mean that everyone is trying to make sense of life and trying to make sense of how the world works, because God has placed eternity within us. There is a story that God has been telling, that he's placed within us. And that's why every show that we watch, every movie that we see, every book that we read that hits on those themes, they resonate with us. And that's why stories that violate the story that's been imprinted on us, we have a visceral reaction to it. So let me ask this question. How many of you saw the movie Infinity War? If I can ask that. Hold them up. Very good. Now, I did this in the other services, and I had everyone raise their hand, and I said, okay, and how many of you really liked the ending? Boom! Everybody put their hands down. And like, no, I didn't like the ending. Now, here's the part that's amazing to me, right? Is how many people objected to the ending, and I'm going to do my best not to spoil it, even though you have had a month and a half, all right? So, Anyway, if you haven't seen it, you got homework. But here's what happens. And friends that I have that don't believe, they're atheists, and they will tell me, I hated it, and I didn't like it, and all of that. And I said to them, I'm very surprised you didn't like it, because what you got was essentially a visualization of your worldview. Why didn't you like it? And I said, so here's what happens is, they say, well, their worldview, that randomness chooses who lives and who dies, that it's totally dispassionate, and that there's no rhyme or reason to anything. And we'll object, yeah, but the way it's done was wrong. Once again, in an atheistic worldview, right and wrong are simply social constructs. This is totally arbitrary as to how it happens. But why do we still have a fundamental problem with it, whether we have a belief in God or a lack of belief? Because whether you believe or not, you still have had eternity placed in your heart. And no matter what, when something violates that which has been preloaded in you, you have a visceral reaction against it. And this is why everything that happens to us isn't vanity. Because it's preparing us for eternity, the eternity that God has promised us. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he had this conversation with his disciples. And he said these words to them in John 14. He says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions or dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. And I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Okay, there are seasons of life. I get that. What is God doing in these seasons? He's preparing me for eternity. But what do I do in the here and now? That's what he says next. Look at verse 12. He says, "I know that nothing is better than for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it that men should fear before him. That which has already been and what is to be has already been, and God requires an account of what is past." Now pause there and give me your attention, please. And here's where we're going to make our initial descent. But he says, what do I do in the meantime? And here's the last thing that he's going to say. He's going to say, I need to display authentic joy. Listen, Christians should be the happiest people on this planet. And yet a lot of times we don't see that. We see believers who look like they've been baptized in lemon juice because they have this, oh yeah, you should come to Jesus. Man, you really should. I'm like, really? It doesn't seem like you're having that much fun with it. But yet, what Solomon says is, so what do you do in this, in the seasons of life? You're preparing for eternity. What do you do in the moment? Solomon tells us three things no matter what season we're in. He says, number one, we should find joy in our work. And that's what I love the qualifier. It's not just says that we should rejoice. He says we should rejoice in life by doing good, by doing meaningful work. And the challenge that so many of us have is that we pursue happiness as kind of an end in and of itself. But the challenge is that happiness and joy are not things to be pursued. Happiness and joy are byproducts of a life of meaning and purpose. What does that mean? He says, but if you look at there in verse 12, he says, then we rejoice by doing and to do good. That when we start doing the thing that God has called us to do, when we serve other people, that we find the thing that we've been looking for. We find joy. We find happiness. You see, here's what I would venture to say. It's true in my life, and I would venture to say that it's true in yours. Outside of getting married and the birth of your children, that the most meaningful moments in your life were moments where you did something for someone else. And more than likely, it was you doing something for someone else who probably had no ability to ever return the favor. Why is that? It's because that's how we're wired. It's one of the reasons why we invite people to serve at Calvary. And a lot of times people are like, well, we know you need the help. Let me just tell you a little thing. We're getting it done without you already. So just put that, so this isn't like, well, we're just trying to bang the gong, hoping somebody. No, there's like hundreds of people that serve in this church. And the reason that we talk about serving all the time is because your soul needs it. Is because you and I cannot grow to maturity. We can't. We cannot grow to maturity if all we do is receive. Instead, what we have to do is receive and then give out what we've learned, and receive some more and then give out what we've learned. In fact, the most mature Christians that you're ever going to meet are Christians who understand this, that we get filled up to the degree that we give ourselves away. So that's the first thing that he says, is he says we should find joy in our work in whatever season that we're in. The second thing is this, is that we should celebrate our friendships. Look what he says in verse 13. He says that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all of his labor. It is the gift of God. Now, you can kind of miss it if you don't realize kind of the cultural significance of this, that eating and drinking in a Hebrew culture was part of celebration. It's what brought families and friends together to remember God's goodness and grace. And it's a reminder to us of our fellowship and how we're walking through life together as we walk with God and walk with one another. Because in that culture, there would be loaves of bread, and then there would be this bowl that was full of some kind of sauce or dip, and you would rip a piece of bread and you would dip it in the sauce and eat it, and then they would dip it in the sauce and eat it, and then they would take another scoop of it, and thank God there were no rules against double dipping in that culture. And so you would take a drink, and what would happen is that was called, in the Greek language, it was called koinonia, what we translate as fellowship. And the idea of this was that, and the idea of koinonia or fellowship was having something in common. And the whole idea around the meal is that the same food that was nourishing me is nourishing you. And sharing that meal, we were now becoming one. And it was a unifying experience. And that's why the 7 holidays that were required, that God established for the nation of Israel, were called 7 feasts. That all of them had a component of food, so that we would all come together and we would have this experience where there would create oneness as we were walking together in community. And listen, you and I, we live in a culture that is more connected than any other culture in human history. And yet this generation, we find ourselves more alone than any other culture that came before it. Why? Because seeing a picture of what someone else is doing and liking it isn't friendship, even if that's what the social media platform calls it. There have to be shared experiences. And God invites us to that in his house. That's why we talk about getting involved in a growth group so much. Listen, because you and I cannot live without people that we walk hand in hand with, that love God and love us and are going to cheer us on when things are going well and are going to be with us when things aren't going so well, but that we have a group of people. Listen, and this happens, these shared experiences happen in his house. And we have to seek them out. They will not seek us out. We have to seek them out. So, but what if the season I'm going in is a tough one? Then the last thing we have to do in your notes is to trust God's heart. That's why it says in verse 14, and whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away from it. That there is nothing that happens without God's knowledge, and nothing catches him by surprise. And that should comfort us. That when the unexpected hits, we can trust in a good God who loves us, and that he has an eternity waiting for us, and that he is going to make everything wrong in this world right in his time. And that process of making everything right began in a moment in history, began with the death and resurrection of his son Jesus, where everything that separated us from God, sin, disobedience, rebellion, all of it was dealt with in that moment on a hill called Calvary. And that we can now come to know God through this relationship, through this forgiveness that we have when Jesus paid the price for us. And that was the beginning of him making everything right. And one day soon he's coming again to really make everything right and transform this world. And when we come together and we celebrate communion together, it's that same fellowship of us becoming one. It's that same koinonia where we say we are together because we are sons and daughters of a heavenly Father. Because we all have a Savior who loves us. And we walk together, and this bread and this cup that is nourishing us, is nourishing you, is nourishing me. And we celebrate that together. And it's a reminder that God is in the process of transforming this world, and he begins with us. So I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward and hand out the communion elements. And I'm going to invite you, as you take the elements, to grab the elements. Yeah, you can grab the elements and hold on to them. And as you do, we're going to partake of communion together. So hold on to them. But maybe this is your moment where you think through as the band sings and you say, what's the season that I just came out of? And how has God used that for the season that I'm in? And what does God want me to do in this season right now to deepen my walk with him, to strengthen the maturity that I have and take me to a new level in my faith? So Pastor George, lead us.
We hope you enjoyed today's message. If you decided to take your next step with God and follow Jesus, please visit mycalvary.com/begin. We have a free gift we'd love to give you. Also, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and also hit the subscribe button down below. From all of us here at Calvary, God bless you.